Hello, Jerry here. Welcome back to the Old Testament prophets. Last week we finished the life of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4. So let me begin chapter 5. We'll just start with 2 words. King Belshazzar. Well, who was he? Well, according to many, he was a fictional character in the Bible because there was no trace in history of him. One German theologian wrote in 1834 about Daniel, "The whole story is disfigured and falsified by the author, who was neither an eyewitness of the occurrences nor accurately acquainted with the history of them." And that was the opinion of many until 1 year before this German theologian passed away, when archaeologists discovered the Nabonidus cylinder in 1854, and out of the ground came the story of the Babylonian king Nabonidus, Belshazzar's father, and how Belshazzar had become a co-regent in Babylon for about 10 years, while his father Nabonidus was in other parts of the empire. And then more finds with the Nabonidus Chronicle in 1882, and more finds in 1914. Ironically, now we know more about Nabonidus and Belshazzar than many other kings. Scholars often feel they live in a favored time when all has been found, but that's never true. So, when was Belshazzar king? Well, we are now several kings after Nebuchadnezzar, who died in 562. He was followed by his son Marduk, who reigned just 2 years. We're told he was a terrible and licentious ruler, and he was soon assassinated. Grew up in the glory years of Nebuchadnezzar, lots of luxuries that he himself didn't work for. So maybe he was a bit spoiled. Or maybe King Neriglissar, who assassinated him, just wanted the throne instead and started those nasty rumors. Neriglissar was the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, and he reigned for 4 years. When Neriglissar died, his son and the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, Marduk, reigned for a few months, April to June of 556 BC, before being killed by Nabonidus in a coup, who strategically married a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar for legitimacy. And it was his son, Belshazzar, a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who became a co-regent concerning the capital Babylon. It's obvious that the kingdom was declining after the golden years of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar died of natural causes in 562 BC, and he was probably around 68 years old, with probably that animal madness occurring in his last 10 years. This story today with Belshazzar would be happening about 23 years after the death of Nebuchadnezzar, or about 33 years from the king's madness. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in front of the 1,000. This drops us right into a very dramatic situation. There was more going on than a feast. According to Babylonian and Persian sources, Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus, led a Babylonian army against the approaching enemy of the Medo-Persians. That's what Dad was doing while Belshazzar was planning a feast. But the Babylonians were defeated, though Nabonidus escaped and may have been trapped in a nearby city. Babylon would have been alerted to these disasters as Persia pressed to the capital city. Siege would begin any day, or had it already started. Medo-Persia had already conquered the rest of Babylonia. They were just cleaning up those last cities around Babylon. Only the capital remained. It's hardly a time for a feast, one would think. However, Babylon had stored enough food and supplies to last them for many years, and there was plenty of water since the Euphrates River ran through the city from a general north-south direction. As we've described, their walls were so thick they could not be broken through. As well, the military road on top of the walls, the road was so wide that any attempt by the enemy against one part of the wall could be strongly resisted from the top. Oh, it's much easier to shoot arrows, throw spears, or drop rocks from a few 100 feet above than to try and shoot upward that far. So all of Babylonia was crumbling, and Belshazzar enjoyed a great feast. About 60 years earlier, the Lord had given Nebuchadnezzar that vision of the great statue with the golden head representing Babylon, even Nebuchadnezzar. But now, while Daniel was still alive, in his 80s, the times were moving toward the arms and chest of silver, Medo-Persia. So now let's try to understand the feast with 1,000 lords or leaders, some of whom were probably leaders from the various cities who fled to the capital after their city was wrecked. When ancient Babylon was excavated by German archaeologists between 1899 and 1917, with lapses because of World War I, they found in the royal palace a very large room, almost 10,000 square feet, with walls made of blue enameled brick or white gypsum plaster, which we may want to remember. So why the feast? Two ancient Greek historians, Xenophon and Herodotus, both noted that there was a major feast that occurred that night, and ancient feasts were almost always connected to their gods. Xenophon also noted that Belshazzar was killed that same night. Xenophon wrote that the Babylonians were not worried about siege because they, quote, had enough provisions for more than 20 years, end quote. I don't know, I kind of doubt 20 years, but it probably was for a long time. He also noted that this festival was one when, quote, Babylon was accustomed to drink and revel all night long, end quote. So maybe this feast was not just to show a bravado against the Persians, but also to keep the gods happy at a crucial time. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. King Belshazzar knew well his grandfather's exploits, including the conquering of Judah and the wealth taken from Jerusalem from the Jerusalem temple. That all this gold and silver had not been melted down shows that Babylon prized these artifacts for what they represented. The loot was preserved in trophy form. But when the royal wine was brought to the king by the cupbearer, and the king approved it, he thought to heighten the festivities by bringing in these Jewish temple articles, the loot, the religious cups, bowls, and pitchers, and then for the guests to use them for their wine. The enemy was not far away, if not already there. And now all the leaders were toasting their gods who had given them historic victories, like with the strong nation of Judah. It was probably a mixture of saluting their gods with the hope of divine protection, and also just national gloating over Judah. But from heaven's view, it was blasphemous to the Most High God, the sanctified items from his temple used in this pagan feast, and that gloating over their victory over Judah and their gods over the God of Judah. there's a scary connection here to one of the prophet Jeremiah's prophecies of the fall of Babylon. Babylon shall become a heap of ruins, the haunt of jackals, a horror and a hissing, without inhabitant. They shall roar together like lions. They shall growl like lions' cubs, which is kind of what they're doing now in this big feast, roaring together. Bravado. While they are inflamed, I will prepare them a feast and make them drunk, that they may become merry, then sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake, declares the Lord. Babylon is taken, the praise of the whole earth seized. How Babylon has become a horror among the nations. Wow, that's very interesting. Verse 4 had said, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. The iron, wood, and stone really extend this beyond the Jewish temple items to materials used in crafting their idols. This verse casts the feast as an orgy of pagan worship, and especially the god's dominance over the God of Judah. Is it not obvious that the time was ripe for the end of the golden head of Babylon? The Most High God halted this party in a stunning way. Immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. Now remember, we're in the much darker ancient world. It was a world lit only by the fire of oil lamps and early candles. So in large rooms like this, there would be multiple wick lampstands standing or hanging from the ceiling. And in a very visible place on the wall, illuminated by a lampstand, God hand-wrote the message that hushed the king and 1,000 nobles. But then the king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers, whom I guess were not on the invitation list. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. Well, that's the second time his color changed. While he didn't know the interpretation, the message was certainly ominous, urgent, definitely from the heavens. And it wasn't a thank you note from the gods. The gods never showed themselves like this, with real actions. This picture, you're looking at Johann Baumgartner's Belshazzar's Feast. Notice the hand from God on the top right, moving toward the wall, and the king changing color. Here's John Martin's painting, which captures the grandiosity of the feast with an ominous moon and sky, and guests moving away from the emblazoned writing on the left. This lavish attempt by Belshazzar to portray a brave and confident royal front, it suddenly collapsed, revealing an obviously frightened, frantic, and helpless king. Now, it could be that some were spooked, got their cloaks, and left, but I suspect many hung around for the wise men's answer. There's something about an emergency scene where people stay and mingle. When Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater, the people had to be urged to leave. The queen, because of the words of the king and the lords, came into the banqueting hall. And the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. Now, most all recognize her as the Queen Mother, the wife of King Nabonidus, mother of Belshazzar. She was not with all the wives and concubines in the party, but came in after the crisis. Mothers know the right answer and remain calm in emergencies. She was probably Nitocris, the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She counseled the king, "There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers, because of an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation." Well, this Queen Mother would have remembered what happened with Daniel. And here she favored his Hebrew name, Daniel. Interesting. The Daniel event with her father Nebuchadnezzar clearly struck her, and she understood a lot more about Daniel than just that he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's vision. She knew Daniel was also still alive in the city. It's a very curious person here, by the sovereignty of God. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king, my father, brought from Judah. I have heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in to me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be third ruler in the kingdom." Well, a lot of flowery words from the king setting up Daniel, but Daniel wasn't having it. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation." Well, it's a great answer. Not rude, I don't think, but definitely setting aside all the words and the honors, and he quickly got to what was really important. The Most High God first had a short sermon for Daniel to communicate, beginning with the king's grandfather. I know he called him his father, but that's how they could use that word. It could be grandfather or father. Now, as I read this short, austere sermon by Daniel in his 80s, try to imagine how he said these words to the co-regent king of Babylon. "O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty, and because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he killed, and whom he would he kept alive. Whom he would he raised up, and whom he would he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of mankind, and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. Belshazzar was a co-regent with his father and Nabonidus way back in 553 and was at least a teenager then, so he may be now between 30 and 35 years old. So all this that happened to his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar happened when he was a very young boy. And he would certainly know this story. Notice the strong connection. And you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. Actually, everyone who knew and heard this story should have taken this lesson from heaven. Let me go back about 60 years to when Nebuchadnezzar was relating to young Daniel the dream of the great tree. Now here's a very interesting verse. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, which, as you recall, meant angels, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of men. So this lesson to Nebuchadnezzar about pride was not just for him, but it was for all the living to know the Most High rules. Everybody. Because they will come to know this sensational story, which seems to be one of the reasons why the Lord made it so sensational. It's the kind of story that people will tell and will remember. Not only has Belshazzar not humbled himself, he has exalted himself against this Most High God. And the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. And you and your lords, Daniel says, your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them. Well, how does Daniel know about the vessels from the temple? Well, he could have seen them on his way in, or maybe God revealed this to him. But imagine the horror in his voice. This is what you're doing with the Most High God's dedicated vessels from his temple? And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know. But the God in whose hand is your breath, in whose hand are all your ways, you have not honored. Wow. Not only has Belshazzar exalted himself against this God, desecrated the Lord's vessels, but he has led this festival of praise to all those gods that don't exist, instead of honoring the God who gives him his very breath. Such an indictment. This act of God against Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather, was the inspired and weighty witness and revelation of God that Belshazzar rebelled against, which leads to the message of judgment, or, as we still say, the handwriting on the wall, when we point to an inevitable negative event that's about to happen. Then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed, and this is the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. Now, I'm almost out of time, but let me use this wonderful painting by Rembrandt to show you the Aramaic writing, which the artist has put letters going downward rather than from right to left, because that is one of the views as to why the wise men could not even read it. But that's just a guess. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Mene, from the verb meaning to count or reckon. Said twice, for emphasis probably. Your days have definitely been numbered. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting, from the verb to weigh. Pares, your kingdom is divided, and given to the Medes and the Persians, from the verb to divide or break up. There's even a play on words to the word Persians, which is made up from those three letters which sound to us like P, R, and S. What Daniel said obviously communicated the message of heaven because it exactly fit Belshazzar. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, and a chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Belshazzar's response? Not recorded. He did fulfill his promise to Daniel. After all, he was probably in front of many of his party guests that hung around, though Daniel wasn't interested in the rewards. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. Somehow, the enemy got into Babylon. God is never short on ways to accomplish his will. But I'm out of time, so let me tell you that interesting story next week, Lord willing. And there's other questions to answer. How did King Nabonidus and his wife Nitocris fare? What about the aged Daniel, now promoted to number 3 at an unwelcome time to be a high-ranking official in Babylon? And what will the Persians do with all those Jewish captives? The Belshazzar story fits right into the theme of Daniel that the Most High God is sovereign over the nations, including Babylon, who holds Judah captive. Nebuchadnezzar finally saw that. Belshazzar did not. Thanks very much.